Hello, and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in property. And Property Matters is supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and Town and Country Property Auctions London. Each week, we search out those stories that are going to get you talking about the property market, of course. And don't be shy, please get involved with the comments underneath the video, and then we can highlight your comments on the screen and get you involved in the conversation. You can email us at any time, of course, propertymatterstv@gmail.com. And don't forget, wherever you're watching us today, to like and subscribe so you get notifications of when we go live. Joining us, of course, is our resident property expert. It's Joshi. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Paul. It's never a dull moment in the property market. There's always things to chat about, and especially when you got shuffles in the government. And for years and years and years, they've been trying to find a chap who's going to come in and solve all the problems that they think exist in property. So we would say welcome to Michael Gove, the 999th million, member of parliament who thinks he's going to now come in and solve all the problems relating to property. But hey, plenty in store, and welcome to all our listeners and viewers this morning. It's a nice morning. And actually, I think summer's arrived a little bit late by the looks of things, just as everybody's gone back to work and gone back and so forth, the sun keeps shining.
Yeah, it is a bit of an Indian summer, isn't it? And we've just got 11 days left before we can drop that phrase stamp duty holiday. And I promise that's about the fifth or fourth last time I'm going to mention it, because we've got a couple of times to mention it today. But since you brought that one up, let's start with Mr. Gove. So it was the day of the long knives as opposed to the night of the long knives, with Mr. Robert Jenrick going to the Prime Minister's office and getting the good news that he was no longer required, or his services were no longer required. But it does indicate an interesting situation, because you've got a Tory party that generally believes that the property market isn't broken, everything's fine, and we don't need to fix it. And you've got a Prime Minister who clearly wants to move on, or is getting a lot of flack for things not moving on. And he's got a fairly busy in-tray, Michael Gove, hasn't he? I mean, he's got a lack of supply and stock. He's got no workers on the building sites. He's got no materials for people to build houses with. We've had a pandemic where we've hardly built any houses at all. We've got an archaic conveyancing system, and everything pretty much that the whole property market relies on just needs to go digital, and it's not. So he's got quite a lot of work on his plate, hasn't he, Joe?
Yes, he has, Paul. And to be perfectly honest with you, whilst they spend their time trying to tell us that they're going to fix these things, in all honesty, it pays them not to fix it to a large extent, because it is what is the most talked about subject in most people's lives. I would rate it in the, probably it used to be the top five. I'll probably almost bring it in the top two now, in the sense that it is what people rely on. They work their investment in there, and of course the biggest place is the home is where the heart is situation, and people want to own and buy their own property. We have constantly, and I've certainly made no bones about the fact that the conveyancing system is very archaic, and because it is so archaic, it takes forever and too long for people to get through the process. The number of houses that they keep saying that they want to build, I've said this before, if they built them and reached every target, the housing market probably would collapse, because there will be nothing to talk about and people won't do it. And constantly they think there's a solution. But as I've said before, we're an island. There's only so much space. But I think there is so much stock that they already have that they could and should recycle much, much better. But Michael Gove is the broom that comes along every time there's a problem, and he thinks he's going to sweep clean. You know what the old adage is: a new broom always sweeps clean, because the old one is worn out a little bit here and there. And he will come along and do what he needs to do. But what we mustn't forget that is that the housing market in the United Kingdom is what has got us to where we are today, even through the pandemic. It is what has motivated the market. It is what has caused shortages, and it is what has caused a lot of building work. So yeah, he's got quite a bit to go on, but it depends where he's going to start, Paul.
Mm. I think your comments there about same old story are echoed within the profession. James Forrester, who's the managing director of one agency, said the government housing carousel continues to turn as yet another one bites the dust, and it remains to be seen if there is any further casualties further down the ranks. Because Michael Gove is known as a big hitter. With a reputation for rocking the boat, we could see some changes. However, the reality is probably more of the same tired, recycled rhetoric around housing policy. And his best quote, I think, is in recent times, those charged with addressing the current housing crisis have lasted less time in their post than it takes to sell a house.
There you are. How much does that speak? It speaks volumes, isn't it? That it's like somebody says, I want to go and this is what I'm going to do and this is my plan. But some houses have been here for centuries, hundreds and thousands of years. Property's been there, and we come and go, but they stay. And it's the same scenario with these ministers. They come and go, but the housing market in the UK is robust, resilient, and creates a lot of investment opportunities. Makes a lot of people happy because they want to live there. And in the last 2 years, in spite of the pandemic, look what it's done in that time. And of course, I'm sure you will have some charts and graphs for me at some stage to tell me these things. But the reality is that it's here to stay. Yes, it does have, as I describe it, it's normally got drive and it's got neutral. Very rarely does it use reverse. And in 40 odd years being in the property market, I haven't seen reverse much. It stayed in neutral and then it goes forward again. And that's what we'll probably see in the next couple of years. It will have a little bit of a neutral spot. And then it'll probably start to pick up again once people have sort of dusted themselves down, got themselves together. And the last 2 years, certainly the last year, with the stamp duty race and the race for space, has meant that people have constantly sort of now they've settled, they've got their places, and the last one is just about to come home at the end of September, and then after that it will go back to some sort of normality. And people have now been spending most of their time doing their places up, which is a separate subject, and we'll cover that a bit later.
You see, it's an interesting dichotomy, really, isn't it? Because, everyone will say, oh, well done, Boris, for giving us all this profit on our properties by giving us a stamp duty holiday. But the reality of property under the Tories has been very different, really, because, the whole sector has been riddled with scandal. We've got Generic, giving property planning permissions to Richard Desmond, and then £12,000 goes to the Tory party. And we've got the targets for building properties, which they're nowhere near meeting. And I think we featured on this show a few weeks ago just how many years it's going to take for them to reach the targets if they carry on at the current rate. So it's not been a good time, despite the fact that everyone says, wow, we've made lots of money thanks to Boris.
But if you break it down to a personal level, Paul, let's say you and I were the people, or the people that are watching it, to them, the grand picture really doesn't make a hell of a lot of difference. They're not really bothered about the government's target. That's the government's issue, not their issue. They're not worried about how many houses they're going to build by 2040. They might not even be alive next year. So half of those things have, no real relevance to the people that actually do and fuel the housing market by owning a property and wanting to own a property, the wish to own a property. So I think the reality is that the government has those figures, and whilst they have that, they themselves help fuel the market, because what they're saying to people is, we've got to do this and we're shortage of that. And that they encourages people to say, well, if they're shortage of doing that, I better go and buy something. And because I'm buying something, it's, I don't want to lose out the opportunity just in case they are right, and they do that. But as long as I've been around in this, which is a very few numbers of years now, it's been the same story, year in, week in, month out, whatever you want to call it. They're always short property. There's always an issue with some policies, and the new guy comes along and says he's going to do this. Now, planning permission and coffers for the Tory party, £12,000 in the grand scheme is shirt buttons to a man who's just got himself a planning permission, because he's going to make a bigger amount of profit. But the mistake he's made, or the mistake they've done, is they've given that. Now, if I was the Tory party, I'd probably want to turn around and say, well, look, you want planning permission, you need to pay a bit more than £12,000. But the reality is, for the £12,000, the bloke's lost a great job that he had. And so, how naive is that? And when I put that into perspective, how naive is that of a minister, right, who's got a fantastic job looking after the whole of that cabinet, that role, and for the sake of £12,000 loses his job? It's the same as the other fellow who kissed his secretary. Just for a kiss on the lips for somebody, he loses his job. These people are so ridiculous in a high posted ministerial job that they get, and for that slip of a moment or slip of a lip in his case, they lose their life. And here is a perfect example. Robert Jenrick had broadly done all right. I mean, he'd got accolades for making the housing market in a difficult time through the pandemic years, the worst years of history in some of our lives. He did all right, and for the sake of whatever it was, he was hung, and incomes was to go. So we'll see what he's going to do, but I don't think he's going to do a great shake. He's come in at the tail end of a good time, so they just want to stir the hornet's nest, and keep the property market in focus so that it doesn't come away. And by bringing Gove in, that's what the issue is going to be. And considering that Brexit's done, now Brexit is done, Paul, but Brexit has caused a huge amount of issues now, and we're now probably going to feel the actual, the problems of that, because the pandemic took that pain away for the last couple of years. But now, when you see supplies, and you see stores empty, and you see prices of materials going up, that is going to be the cost of Brexit now beginning to come home. And Michael Gove was part of that Brexit thing. So I'd be interested to see, what shambles he's going to make of the housing market after we did a fantastic job in coming out. Well, now he's got to go back to the same people that he told he wanted to come out from and say to them, well, actually, can you be nice to us? Because, you're charging too much for the goods that are coming into the United Kingdom. And our prices are going up and costs are going up. So he's got to go back with a begging bowl. So Boris is quite clever, because don't forget, Boris and Gove fell out about the leadership job. So Boris has given him another crappy role to go and deal with.
Well, the interesting thing is, I mean, that you think that Jenrick did a good job. I mean, from the comments I see and from what I think myself, he seemed pretty impotent, because the truth of the matter is there's been report after report after report about the need for change, the need for revolution, particularly around things like conveyancing and so on. The whole of the industry is still set in the previous century, let alone this century. In fact, it's probably set in the century before that in some respects. But the truth of the matter is that the Tory party itself does not want change in the property market. It suits them to leave it as it is, because it suits them, because they're the ones who own the properties. And at the end of the day, I suspect that the reason Gove's come in is because he's going to have to shake the tree a little bit and say, look, come on. If he's going to do a good job, I would suggest, he's going to have to say, come on, you lot, we need to get this property industry fit for purpose. We need the processes, the digital platforms, and he needs SMEs to invest in in developing property, not just the big boys. So he needs to make it easier for the bits of smaller pockets of land to be put out so that they can be developed by smaller companies. And only then will we start to see anything really change. Do you not think?
What I meant by saying that Jenrick had done a good job is that basically he'd held it together for the pandemic years. I don't think he actually did anything, and he didn't really need to. And whilst he didn't do a good job by other standards, it just meant that he didn't bugger up what he inherited. And it was difficult to do that because everybody was on the warpath of owning a property. The stamp duty situation was created by Sunak, and he just rode the storm as far as that's concerned. However, and they came out with the statement, as you know, that we want a generation of buyers and not generation of renters in terms of how the property market should go. they wound that up. The media, the social media, the marketing was all designed to make people buy, and to do that was to build themselves out of the costs that they had incurred during the pandemic period. All the money that had gone out, they needed to do that. And the only industry, the main industry that continued to keep afloat was the property market and its related businesses, like the developers, like the builders, like the DIY stores. Those are the things that kind of sustained and got through to us from where we are. In terms of the system, Paul, yes, it is not 1 or 2 centuries, probably 3 centuries old. It's ridiculous, really. And we're still behind doing that. I had the privilege, or should I say, maybe not so much a privilege, of having a little survey, being part of a survey this last week with HMRC for the land registry survey to discuss how archaic is our system and how much information is actually available online. So part of what you're saying in terms of digitalization is coming, and it was quite interesting to see how much more information is available. But what it didn't take away was that after a certain amount of information, you actually still needed to employ a solicitor to actually write to the local authorities, who then have to wait. I mean, I think we discussed it on our show here. Some local authorities take up to between 5 and 6 weeks to reply to a search, let alone when you can actually do most of it online within an hour. And so there are so many areas, so many pockets of areas that are just not going to be right in a short space of time. So yes, they are looking at the digitalization of the whole property market, but probably not at the cost of losing the solicitors that are involved in it. Because at the end of the day, like you say, there's a lot of people that are in property, be it perhaps Tory supporters, and so they don't want the change to happen, because when the change happens, there are jobs that are going to be lost, there are profits that are going to be lost. So I think, as I said at the outset, I don't think they can bring as many people as they like. Really, it doesn't pay for them to change it a great deal, because if they change it too much, then there's nothing else to talk about.
Mm. Some of the comment in the industry quite interesting, saying that really what Gove needs to do, if he's really going to set the agenda here, is to bring housing, health and social care all under the one banner. So look at this in terms of because the suggestion is there's been far too much focus on trying to get first-time buyers into the housing market, and at the expense of, for example, specialist housing at the other end of life, so that the NHS and social care systems can have properties that are specialist properties for those people to move into, which would free up the family homes, which would free up money being spent on converting family homes to look after elderly or disabled people. So if we could actually think about building for the other end of the social spectrum, as well as just the first time buyer, and then think about how housing supports social care and health, would be a much more all-round way of looking at this.
I think it's a great idea. Well, the problem is that people that get accustomed to living in a style and a lifestyle that they have find it equally disturbing to try and put their entire worldly wealth into a couple of rooms in some nursing home. I suppose the reality is that we are all, going to go in a little 6 foot by 1.5 foot box ultimately. But the mental block that comes in people's mind is that I don't want to lose my big garden. I still like the roses at the bottom on the right hand side. It's just a mindset that it takes it difficult. Now there should be a structure of maybe downsizing in a systematic form that could have some benefits there, so that if someone has got a massive house or some sort of what do they call it, a swap, if you want to call it that, that somebody could come into a slightly smaller home and let family go into a bigger home, etc. So there's lots of schemes that come into play, but The biggest problem I find is that when I've traveled around looking at people's properties, and it's far beyond their manageable position, it's too big, it needs too much doing to it, they just can't break themselves away. And it's almost at the end of that point where someone has to come and make a decision, a member of family or a doctor or someone says, you just can't live here anymore. And that's when, and it's almost too late in the day. So what I'm saying is that I think the concept could be good, that so people should move out into smaller properties and have maintenance and have maybe a warden assisted accommodation. But the problem is that I find also in the comments that come back, and you've seen many BBC Panorama programs when people have gone into these situations, and the staff that they employ are not at the caliber and the level that they should be. People get abused, and that then frightens people to say, I'd rather stay in my place, even though it's too big and I don't want to let it go, but I don't want to be abused or used in a home or in a nursing home. And families, so there's a huge climb to try and achieve what they want to do. But I think it's a good idea, and I just think it needs to be thought through um, quite cleverly. Where they should probably consider, and it goes back to the old traditional way about, your parents look after you when you were a child, and it's your turn to look after them. And unfortunately, the problem is that we live in such a fast world now that people don't have the time to, or don't have the space to add to their property, and then they feel that that parent is a burden on them, and subsequently they get shoved into some one bedroom, ensuite nursing home, where some are lucky, they get some nice people to help them and service them, and some are unlucky because those people are just doing that job because it's just a job they can get, and that then suffers. And so it's like good news and bad news, Paul. Bad news always travels fast. Good news doesn't travel at all. So bad news, if someone says, oh, they went into a nursing home and they didn't look after my parents, that's 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock news, prime time news to say, look, this is what's happened in this particular nursing home and so forth. No one takes it. It's that thankless task for the good people who actually done a good job. Actually, today, lady was probably going to fall off a chair, and somebody came along and helped her and saved her life. That's not good. That's good news, and it doesn't sell the places, to be honest with you. So I think there is some merit in trying to work a program, but my concern is that I think it's just too far away, and people just find it hard to break away. I mean, I see this live when I go to people's homes and see them and talk to them, and they just don't want to do it.
Be interesting to see what people have in the want to say in the comments. Do you think Michael Gove is a good appointment for housing? Do you think that's going to be a good thing? Are you positive about change? Let's see your comments, please, for Michael Gove in the role of housing minister. Okay, let's move on to another story, which is another side of something that we've talked a lot about. So we've talked during the stamp duty holiday period about the buyers paying too much, the premium that people were paying, gazumping and all that kind of thing. But how have the sellers got on? And it's interesting because there's some new research coming out that says property sellers made an average gain of more than £110,000 over the past year. So this is sellers in England and Wales made average gains of £110,331 in the year to May, which worked out to be year-on-year profit increase of 15,587. This is as the stamp duty holiday and the race for space push prices to record highs. The analysis shows that the strongest sale activity came from those selling in the 3 to 7 year period of ownership, Joe, 38.3%. Those sellers made an average profit of £54,000 in that time. By contrast, sellers who bought their home at the bottom of the market in 2009 made an average profit of £144,000. And you can see on the screen there, so if you look, the length of hold there, so 0 to 5 years, you've got £40,498. That's an increase of £4,400. If you held it to 10 years, you'd make £68,000, only another £28,000 for your extra 5 years. And then even less if you had it another 5 years to 15 years, and pretty much 14,000 for 20 years, and then obviously if you hold it over 25 years, another almost 20,000. So it looks that from those figures there, and the suggestion is that maybe moving more frequently is the way to move up the ladder in terms of gains.
So when I started in this back in 1980, the average time scale for people to move was 1 to 3 years. Every 3 years, the plan was that people would move. That came up to five as time grew up, primarily because of the lack of properties or the types of properties and where they got to in their personal life and status. So if you because the country is based on progression and size of property. So you imagine yourself that you bought yourself first maybe a studio or a 1 bedroom. You're not going to really last in there for much more than maybe 2 years, possibly 3 years at the outset. Certainly not in a studio. Maybe in a 1 bedroom you might do better, and a 2 bedroom. So gradually you're going to move to the next stage. Either you're going to move to a 2 bedroom end of terrace or a 3 bedroom terrace property, and so forth. So that cycle of 1 to 5, 1 to 7 years was quite prevalent, and it still is just there as well. The time that the longer is when they come to where I say they come home, where they've decided that they've got their nice detached house, nice big garden. Kids are at a school that may be going to be there for the next 5, 6, 10 years. The little one starts afterwards, so that's another 5, 6, 10 years. So they're stuck in that sort of environment for maybe 10, 15 years. That market is the end of the road market, and then it only shrinks back down again when the kids have left the nest, and then people say, well, actually, this is now too big for me, and I'm going to go to the coast or do whatever else they're going to do. So there's a set pattern in how people do that. What the good news is that you're showing there is the news that I've always said, that you can't make a better investment than buying a property. And if you look at £15,000 in a year, most people will find it difficult to save £15,000 in a year. And that's what encourages people to want to buy. So this has a double-edged sword. Not only do they save and made £15,000, they've also lived in a property that is their own and maintained it and enjoyed it, as opposed to perhaps living in a rented accommodation and then feeling that all they've done is plowed money into someone else's home, or not being able to make it a home. It's just a house where they just go and chuck their things in and go to sleep and then leave, because it's not their property. And because it's not their property, they'll never put that energy into making it a home, which is what the difference is in terms of what the home is and what the house is. So I think it's still a great investment that people do. I think you're right in saying that maybe the sooner that they move, the more profit they make. But what I'm saying is that it's fundamentally not about that. It's the life cycle in their own home that makes changes. So if you are a couple and you've decided to, tie the knot and have children, then that's going to determine when and how you're going to move. And then that changes at the other end of the scale when you've actually done your dues, and you're left now with the two of you in a big house. And that's the problem we had in the earlier story, that people don't want to then downsize because they've now just about to get to enjoy what they thought, because they've spent their whole time actually putting energy into the family as opposed to putting energy into themselves. So but the bottom line is, my parting words on this particular point will be, you cannot make a better investment than buy your own home. And that's always been my stance, because at the end of the day, people are always going to do very, very well out there.
Certainly, in terms of regions, the southeast benefited the most. The average gain was an extra 18,700 in the southeast, 141,000 in total. London has made the most money, but the smallest increase in profit. Their profit just up 5,300. The southwest shooting up, and obviously, not surprisingly, detached properties got the largest gains. So those purchasing their detached property in the last 25 years made an average of 166,000, which is an average 56% uplift on the original price, and 22,500 more than this time last year. So it's those much sought after 3 and 4 bedroom homes that are getting the most profit for people. But it's interesting to see the increase in the number of people moving in and around the 5-year mark, as they see that as their quickest way of going up the ladder.
Yeah, and it's designed for people to go up the ladder in just exactly that way. And as I said to you, it's just about where they are in their life. But normally, within the first 1 to 7 years, that is the regular move that happens. The longer stays are, yes, maybe the detached house, but then they are, because they are desirable, and people aren't shifting out of them as quickly as you'd like them to shift out of them. That's where the supply and demand kicks in, because the demand is higher for the nice detached houses. But if you live down Acacia Avenue and it's a tree-lined road, and you've made it, and you're not going to leave there for maybe 20 years. So that property doesn't come into the marketplace for a long, long time. So that's why the gains are higher and the demand is much, much higher as well.
It's been a pretty sorry story for those trading in flats, because they have lagged significantly behind the growth of properties, particularly those that don't have outside space. And this research from Savills, interestingly, they finished their report by saying that they think that prices will flatten out at 9% growth this year, and then 3.5% expected in 2022, which is probably just a correction of the market, isn't it?
It is a correction of the market, and I've been saying that come next year we will start to see a little bit of a neutral gear, a little bit of a stay, primarily because it's a race for space, the stamp duty, the pandemic, and people are now beginning to sort of think about other things. I mean, yesterday's announcement of the amber and the red and the green system, put a surge on travel. All of a sudden, people they felt they've been locked in. So next year, their focus is going to be on other things, which is not a bad thing for other parts of the industry as well. So it's going to actually slow down the housing market, not to a point where it's a standstill, but it just means that people that need to move will move, and have to move will move, and those that have been waiting because they couldn't get themselves, and just decided not to be part of the race, will wait and gain, because those values may not be rising as quickly as they have been, and they may come to a more of a correction, and they'll actually probably get a better chance. So whilst they may have not have gained through the stamp duty part of it, what they may gain is that the values would have held, and so subsequently they'd still buy a good value property. Um, and long-awaited recreation and in the hospitality industry, which has been suffering crazy for the last couple of years, is it's probably their turn next year, the year after. That's where their gains are going to come, and yet we're still going to see some victims of that situation, because some people have just not been able to hold on to their businesses and sustain it. And yesterday I travelled through a number of high streets looking at properties for clients, and some are buzzing because there is an effect there, and some are quite sorry to see how many shops and things are closed and probably won't come back open again, until somebody comes up with a new business. So, most of them were hospitality related, but the takeaway business is doing okay, and but the actual sit down is just about coming back into flow, as we talk.
Going back to Michael Gove, Bob says this job is the knacker's yard of politics.
I agree with you, Bob. Absolutely, 100%. That's why I say every other week or month they send a new person in just to do the same thing, because really it doesn't need solving, because it suits them not to solve
Unless he does well, he's toast. And don't forget,
it.
go stab Boris in the back. Yes, none of us can forget that. So thank you for your two penneth, Bob. Very good. Thank you. Um, our third story this week, a new report on the state of the lettings industry, which is an annual in-depth survey. This is of 550 agents and 1,700 tenants across the UK, released by Good Lord and Vouch, and basically looking at where the concerns of agents and tenants might be in this 12 months. And the biggest concern of agents is the lack of stock. 83% have seen landlords leave the sector in the past year, and 64% believe the coming year will bring more attrition. The lack of stock, 32% of agents says it was their major concern. Almost half of agents said more than 5% of landlords had left the sector in the past year. 28% said under 10% had left the sector, and 14% under 20%, which seems quite astonishing. Because we've seen some quite encouraging figures about the lettings industry, particularly with the stamp duty situation and obviously low interest rates. But they suggest that it was an opportunity perhaps for some, I think you've probably mentioned this before, Joe, if I remember, that a number of perhaps older landlords were seeing the opportunity to take the money from the properties and then buy something for themselves, maybe with less stamp duty. And they'd seen things like regulation increase, and the notion of Section 21 going very shortly might have put some fear into them or negativity. So it's interesting to see that stock and people leaving the industry are the biggest concerns of the agents.
Yes, in the short term, I think that would be, but in the long term, different investors are coming in much different ways. Um, the problem when they have this stock going is the older stock pool, and the older landlords who just gone past their sell by date to manage them and upgrade them and deal with what is going on. That's the hardest part I find, and that's because there's a number of things that drive that in the background. For starters, to find good tradespeople is becoming a huge challenge, because good tradespeople are booked and busy because of the pandemic and because of the number of people buying. So sometimes it just brings a sort of a decision to the forefront where people say, well, actually, I can't get someone to do this. I'm fed up with the leaky tap, and I'm just going to get rid of it. So the old stock is what's been selling. And the new stock, like the flats and the boxes and the modern, is really up for the new people, because older landlords don't particularly like those, because they're okay at the beginning. But if you then look at the communal area of a block of flats, it's just carnage. You can't control that. And so people turn around and say, I'd rather not be there. But also equally, there's a lot of people that would like houses, but don't maintain the houses. I mean, the worst tenants normally are in houses, because they don't like to cut the grass and deal with the house that needs doing outside. And the landlord can't get somebody to go around there and do it because he's finding it hard to do. So there's a section, an area that kind of just motivates people to say, well, I'll get rid of that, because it's not. And also their life becomes a state. So I think we're just going through that little, I'm not sure what I want to do with my life situation at the moment. Do I do this or do I do that? And with that, obviously, statistics will change. But in the next couple of years, a new breed of landlord will arrive. Once they've settled down based on what they've been doing, their next step will be to buy investment properties and to get buy to let and to move forward. Because the best form of income and the best form of steady income, maybe a pension or a long-term gain, is going to be back through property. Yes, there are people that invest in stocks and shares and so forth, but stocks and shares, they take management time probably more so than the property does. You literally got to watch the stock and understand it, and you've got to be that kind of a person that can sit there and wait and do that. But in property, people always have felt that they can touch it, feel it, see it, turn the key, even if it's lying empty, open the door, go inside and go, oh, this is mine, even though 95% of it belongs to the bank. It's still something that they can attach themselves to. So, yes, I can see that in the short term, but in the long term, I don't think it will go away.
It's interesting, actually. You can see why some, perhaps the more traditional landlords, shall we say, are leaving the sector, because just in some of these figures, you can see the dichotomy. You've got 38% of tenants thinking that the repeal of Section 21 will be really, really good news. That view is only shared by 8% of agents. 30% of agents think it'll be major and negative overall. And then you add into that 43% of tenants thinking that the impact of the introduction of lifetime deposits will be really good. Just 70% of agents think that's good. So you add in the additional legislation and compliance that's required for landlords, and then you're getting the repeal of Section 21 later this year, and that means they'll have to use Section 8, which is a lot more costly and a lot more involved, and no guarantee that you're going to get the outcome that you'll get from Section 21. So you can just see some of them going, do you know what? I've had enough.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's just we're just going through that phase of I've had enough because I don't understand this anymore. It's not the way it used to be. But come 2 years down the road and you've got all these things change, people will get used to the new systems and they will adjust and adhere to those rules, and subsequently will go back to investment because ultimately, even if they weren't making a month-to-month profit on the money that they're making, they are making a capital gain in the
Yeah.
long term. So what else is going to give them that? We've just talked about house prices going up and people making £15,000, £20,000 in a year. That's the capital growth, not the month to month cost that is actually given to them. They're not actually making a living out of it, but they do say to themselves, well, if I had two or three properties that I managed to buy as a buy to rent, buy to let property, and they all gone up by 10, 15, £20,000 in a year, that's okay. I mean, if you were going to get rid of them all, pay your tax on it, and live off the back of some of those. It's good, but they can refinance them. They can take the capital out. They can do all sorts of remortgages on them, and so people will continue to invest and buy, but it'll be just a different breed of person, and there'll be a different breed of agent. Don't forget, it's not agents are also getting archaic, a bit like me, getting old and gonna eventually move on. So the new younger generation will come in, and they have a different way of thinking about how they're going to deal with these things.
Interesting comments coming in from Guy this morning. Guy saying less stock, yes, but the average length of tenancy is much longer than it was 10 or 20 years ago. That's good for landlords and agents who are doing rent collection. But he also mentions that I did see that Labour are proposing further tax on landlords, which is always a fear. So yeah, it's quite a volatile sector to be in currently, and as you say, going through a lot of change.
Yeah, and good morning, Guy. Thank you for that. Always good to have your view. Guy is somebody who's got longevity, a bit like me in the business, and we've seen tremendous amount of changes that happen. And yes, the tenants are staying longer, and actually part of this whole reprieve is about allowing people to be longer in their property because they feel that there is an uncertainty if it's a 6 to 12 month, and then the landlord has the right to throw them out. So people want to have a little bit more confidence, a bit more stability in their lives. And especially when the changes have happened in this last couple of years for the race for space and working from home, they feel that if they're going to be working from home or they're setting up a business that is going to work from home, they want some sort of stability, even if they are just renting for a 2 year, 3 year period. They need to know that they're good and safe there, not moving their business. It's not healthy for anyone setting up a business to be shifting after 6 months or 12 months because it doesn't give a good view. So there's a whole bunch of things that actually makes people think about what they want to try and do. And so longevity is good for the tenants. And for the agents as well, because as Guy says, they're collecting rent. That they know that they've got guaranteed income coming in for that period.
Well, the job of housing minister may be the knacker's yard of politics, but you have it here exclusive. Guy Charrison would take the job on tomorrow. So,
Guy, I'm going to vote you in straight away, mate. Don't you worry about that.
when the time comes, Premier Joshi. Right.
Yeah.
Story story of four this week. This is an interesting one, actually. New research has revealed where the areas of the market have seen the most activity from cash buyers. Can you believe that in this study by Barrows and Forrester across Great Britain, just over a quarter, 27% of homes sold so far this year went to cash buyers, Joe. So a quarter of the market is cash.
Yeah. And why not? And the reason why it's cash is the changes that are happening. And I've brought this into our discussion before. You have to remember that 20, 25 years ago, a lot of people took interest-only mortgages. And the opportunity has presented itself for people now to maximize the value of their home and sell, and subsequently have bought properties for cash out of the balance of what's left, because they don't need the mortgage on it, and so they've cleared it. So if you take the north and south as a rule, as a divide, the south has done well, and people don't need to be there, and they don't need to work in the big smoke in the city anymore, and they can actually work. So I'll go back to that fellow who said that his now new role was a delivery driver, and he could be a delivery driver anywhere in the country. The rate for his pay didn't change, but the rate and the space and for his life changed tremendously. So he could live in the north of England somewhere for a couple of £100,000 and buy a small holding, which has given him a nice detached house, and a space for his van and all that sort of stuff, and moved from the south because the job actually doesn't matter whether he's delivering in Yorkshire or he's delivering in, Mayfair. It's just didn't matter in that sense. So there's been a whole bunch of people that have just thought, well, this is the window of opportunity. This whole circumstance of the pandemic has provided an opportunity for them to be able to sort of say, well, I can cash in London perhaps, or in the south, and then move a bit further out and actually clear my mortgage. So subsequently, they've been able to buy those properties for cash.
And the best chances you've got of getting a property for cash, or selling your property for cash rather, is in the southwest or Scotland. 33% of the sales there. So almost, well, a third of the market sold for cash in Scotland and the southwest. London is your least likely, where only just 15% of homes sold for cash. But if you really want to look at specific little local regions, North Norfolk, 55, nearly 56% of properties sold for cash in North Norfolk. Look at that.
But if you look at those, every one of those points you've made only endorses the point that I made. They sell within the areas that they don't need to be, and they go to the areas where there is least. So, I always say that, for example, Norfolk, and then you go to the west, these are all coastal areas where people want to go and live and retire and enjoy the countryside. So
Mm.
they've done their dues in life, they've paid, they've got their kids grown up, they don't need to be here. They don't want to have a mortgage around their neck. They sold the property and went into those particular areas where they get good value for money, good lifestyle, fresh country air, and buy for cash.
And you can see that supported in the table where the lowest percentage of cash sales happened. Barking and Dagenham, Slough, Lewisham, Waltham Forest, Greenwich, Newham, Watford, Hillingdon. With the greatest respect to those areas, not places you'd likely to retire.
No, but then those are the areas that you live and work and make your money to go out to retire. It's just a system that has existed in all the years, and I'm sure Guy will, come in and endorse that part of it because, Guy himself and myself, we've worked in the areas that you've got currently on your list there, and those are all areas that people have come in, businesses grow there. Heathrow is probably the largest single employer for West London on its own. All of those areas that you talk about are surrounded by places like Heathrow, Stansted, Gatwick, where industry happens. But yes, but as time goes on, they want to sell there because that's where all the demand is for jobs. The next generation moves in, and then they move out. And I'm sure Bob will have something to say on that part because, from a mortgage point of view, certainly when you look at the mortgages, this is where the mortgages are highest. People need to buy for mortgages, and the areas that you said where people move to are where people's are not using as much mortgage because they bought those for cash. So it's a system, Paul, and it's been going for forever. I'm not sure which minister is ever going to come and change our mental way of thinking. Of I'll go and work in London or I'll go and work in Heathrow. Get the kids growing up, put them in a nice schooling. They're gone, and now I want to go to the coast and retire and enjoy my life in the countryside.
We spoke a few weeks ago, if you remember, Joe, about the suggestion of changing some of the allotments into properties in London. And now the next victim of the think tank, this is partly to do with, I think it's the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, is employing some guys to do some thinking on how they can solve the London housing crisis. And the suggestion here from one particular individual, just get his name here, Russell Curtis. He's the architect. He's an architect and author of Golf Belt, a new study of how London's golf courses could help address the housing crisis. Apparently, they could provide enough space for 300,000 people, according to fresh new research. Now, this isn't obviously the privately owned courses. This is the ones that are under ownership of local councils, church commissioners, that sort of thing. So the suggestion is that it would be outraged to turn all of that green space into concrete. That's not what they're suggesting. They're suggesting that they could be made more communal areas. I'm not entirely sure how that would work, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's some statistics here. According to the study, Britain is the home to a quarter of all the golf courses in Europe. This tiny island of ours have a quarter of all Europe's golf courses. And 1 in 20 of those is found in London, despite the capital making up just 0.65% of the UK's total land area. So hugely focused in London and hugely focused on the UK compared to the whole of Europe. So there's a lot of land there.
Yes, and it is for those reasons alone which people are attracted to come to the United Kingdom. It has the safest, the securest, the best of most things. And yes, they can build probably a bit more property on the fringes of some of these golf courses. And becomes the problem, what's good for the goose has got to be good for the gander. And so if the local authorities are allowed to give themselves permission to build properties on the belts of good golf courses that they own, then the private golf courses are going to be straight behind that, as you know. So, for example, recently Stoke Park, which is near us here, was bought by a very wealthy Ambani family in India, £57 million. Now, they just bought the golf course. Now they'll be one of the first people that will say, okay, if that's the case, we can get some of our money back very quickly by building all around it, and it will change the entire environment of what is golf and what makes the area attractive. So I think there's some margin. Now, if you look at some of the football pitches of recent times, Paul, they went through the same scenario. So, they've built apartment blocks in some of the corners of the entries of the football pitches or around the stands and so forth. And so people are always looking for different ways of how they can increase the value of their land and also increase the space that is required, but at a cost. And the cost is always the loss of green space. And like you said, we're a tiny little island. And, if we've got so many golf courses, the last thing you want to do is theoretically, you want it to become Hong Kong, because Hong Kong, for argument's sake, is just a complete monstrosity of buildings. There's nothing there that happened. And the United Kingdom, England, is not that way designed, or the thought process. And there are too many people that love the green space. And we all like the green space. It's nice to know that, especially when you think that, during the pandemic, thank God we had a lot of this green space, and people went out and at least were able to walk around and look after themselves and do those things. So there's a lot of things that make normal sense in my mind. But I think there is some argument for perhaps looking at some. But whatever they do, they have to remember that they might do it collectively and correctly, but private owners will then start to say, well, actually, we want that too. And then, where do you stop? So it's either it doesn't happen, or if it does happen, it's got to be good for everybody.
So there are 43 publicly owned courses in London. They take up just under 4,000 acres in Greater London. That's bigger than the London borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and has a population of 185,000 people. So what they're suggesting is they could literally house another 185,000 if they took all those 43 courses. But Sadiq Khan has said he's determined to protect the green belt, of course. But this Mr. Curtis says that who's one of his advisors, interestingly, to help him to try and get some sustainable development in the capital. He says he questions whether golf courses meet the definition of metropolitan open land. So
Hmm.
he's suggesting that they may not even be green spaces in his view.
Yeah, I think it. What do they say? The law is an ass, and so therefore, it's about individual's opinion. And when you want to put a fight up to say something is what you want to achieve, then you're going to find a view or a version of what you think is correct. So yes, they could turn around and say it's metropolitan as opposed to being green space. Um, and then there'll be a fight put up, and we'll spend hundreds and thousands of pounds in courts and so forth to get someone to agree it. And eventually, the government will say no, because at the end of the day, like I've said to you, if all of these things that everybody has a think tank for goes out there and starts to do the building that they want, this government will not have a role for a minister at all. Guy and I would be able to do that just by ourselves from remotely. So subsequently, the housing market would theoretically look to collapse. People will not have the same interest or investment in it. But at the same time, these jobs are created by people like Sadiq Khan to give some guy a bit of an angle and say, go and see what you can do and we'll stir it up. But when it comes to the crunch, I cannot imagine, maybe not in my lifetime, but certainly during my lifetime, I cannot imagine that they are going to allow the space around golf courses to be considered for masses of construction. Because if they do that with one, they have opened a hornet's nest for
You can
everybody.
imagine the headlines, can't you, in the papers? Similarly, if they did the same with the allotments, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Last story of the week: 70% of people think that working from home is here to stay. A majority of workers say they actually prefer it, if not full time, at least part time. However, senior leaders of businesses, a YouGov poll said that the 38% are against it. Interesting story, or rather, they think it's not so good for them. And According to research, more than three-quarters of people believe their boss will allow them to continue working from home for some sort of period of time, which asks the question, and the reason why this is in Property Matters today is it going to be possible for estate agents to work from home, Joe? And do you think that the owners of the businesses will accept the calls for more flexibility?
Well, the answer to that question is that estate agents should have been really wise many, many years ago. So I'm going to go back to the time when Century 21 first came to the United Kingdom as a franchise outfit. And in America, they had agents, realtors, and I'm sure Guy will have a few minutes of that because he's in the US. They've been working from home forever. They do have a central base that they can go in and tie up the contracts, etc., if they wanted to. But majority of the cases, they don't need to be in a high street estate agency. In the UK is quite archaic in that term. And if you look at it logically, now when I first started in this, I mean, I remember having an office in Cold Harbour Lane, and people used to come in and talk about properties. Now we never see anybody come to the office. You see them at the property. You deal with most things online. You deal with most contracts through emails and so forth. And so subsequently, you could really work from anywhere. And more agents are waking up to that. But, 20, I would say 30 years ago, when this sort of concept was mooted in the United Kingdom, they said no. And they said, no, never, never, never. We would never do it. They also said the same to the internet, Paul. When the internet first came here, they said it would never be successful. Nobody's ever going to use it. It's just rubbish. It's all in America. And they say that about pretty much everything because we're a bit archaic in the UK. We eventually get round to it. And now the most used internet out of everywhere in the world, funny enough, is in the United Kingdom. And probably in the next 10 years, you'll probably find majority of the agents will all work from home remotely or in conjunction with some operation that gives them a place to harbour and work. That has been proven. Even in the last 2 years, when the majority of them are sitting at home, the housing market hasn't collapsed. In fact, if anything, it's actually done quite well, and they've still been, selling property from wherever they've been doing. So I think the future for estate agencies is definitely a potential for remote. I encourage it, because I think that flexibility has got to be. People are now moving and doing jobs differently, and so we have to adapt to that. Yes, there's a sort of a 9 to 5 situation. And the reason why the 9 to 5 situation really exists is not because of agents, it's because the legal system, and I'm going to have another go at them, is available only from 9 to 5 and a 1 o'clock lunch break religiously. So you can't talk to anybody at 1 o'clock because they switch the switchboard off. And between 9 and 5 is the only time, but then they don't want to talk to you either. So that's the problem. They haven't changed, and therefore our system is kind of working around that. But thank God, I'm moving towards mostly into the auction side, and by doing that, it meant that I've got my legal packs and I can get on with my job, and I don't have to wait for somebody to make a decision for us. But clients obviously have the choice to go to their lawyers and have these things checked. That's their prerogative. But change has got to happen. Change is happening. Change has happened already, and I think the future for estate agency definitely has a chance for people working remotely. I think they just need a hub somewhere. You want to belong to someone. You want to work in a central. Because I think the bit that they miss is the camaraderie, the motivation, the buzz that goes on in an office, and that part of it. So you can create that. And I've yourself that I have spoken about this, I don't know how many years back when we all started to work together, and it's one of the things that I felt was very strong. But you need a strong person that's going to be able to deal with that, and they have the belief. They are now having the belief, and people are beginning to come in there. My only unhappiness, if you want to call it, is the cheapness of what estate agents put themselves to. Telling people that they can sell a house for £99 is the most ridiculous thing under the sun. When it can't happen. Purple Bricks came into the market doing that. They're now putting their prices up because it's just not sustainable. The only winner in that is the seller and the client. And I don't know why agents do it. They don't need to do it. Clients do need you, and if you're good at what you do, they will pay for you. And if you're not, you're going to sell yourself short. But by working remotely, you should be able to sustain good fees. In the US, they're paid 6%, on a transaction. No issues, no arguments, right?
No.
Here, £99. How ridiculous is that?
Interesting that everyone agrees with you, Joe. Bob says, yes, agents working from home. All of his team work from home. The technology is so good. Guy says, well, the agents who have the self-employed models all seem to be thinking that's the future. So, yes, home working will increase. And he adds, look at Perry Power. He has agents in a wide area now, and he has the self-employed model. So it seems that everyone agrees with you. Bob also said that he has a client that's got a PP on a golf course. So there are some that are being developed, by the look of it there. He also mentioned about mortgages in London. He says sub 300,000 will be extinct in the next year in London. So there'll be no need for a £300,000 mortgage because there won't be any properties under 300,000. And and we'll end today on a rallying cry from Bob saying, Joe Joshi for Housing Minister. So, on that bombshell, I think we'll draw to a close for this week. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. A fun and entertaining, hopefully, edition of Property Matters. And, of course, the show will return next Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Thank you for watching.